Death Note is one of the most discussed and analyzed anime of all time, and for good reason. From themes of justice and morality, its lore, to the cat and mouse pursuit between the central characters, there's just so much to unpack. So I boldly decided to choose it as my topic for an October video. Surely it'd be easy to analyze through one of those concepts. About a month ago, I started rewatching the series to get a better idea of how I wanted to approach it. I hadn't watched it in nearly 15 years, so I was watching with semi-fresh eyes. Some aspects of the show didn't quite stand the test of time, like Misa's characterization being way more nonsensical than I remember.
I'll be a good girl and go to bed by myself, okay?
Still, I watched every episode genuinely waiting for the moment some profound line of dialogue or vital scene would switch on that light bulb in my head and I'd have a juicy take to blow your minds, or at least entertain you for 20 minutes. By now, you've probably guessed that moment never came, because Death Note isn't about justice. It's not about morality or even the threat of mortality. And the central characters, the rivals we're meant to compare, Light or L, who will win out in the end, I came to realize their perspectives didn't amount to much when applied outside of their convoluted battle of wits. No, the main person, or rather character, that really piqued my interest was the unconcerned Shinigami Ryuk. It kind of baffled me that a nihilistic spirit demon accidentally underscored the vitality of human nature. So in this video, I'll be discussing the 2006 anime to shed light on Light and L's flimsy ideologies, and how Ryuk highlighted what exactly it is that made humans so interesting. Real quick reminder that if you enjoy our videos, consider being a patron. It really helps us out and it's only $2. Thanks. Dropped into the human world by the Shinigami, or death god, Ryuk, the Death Note holds the power to kill any human whose full name is written in it, with the condition that the writer pictures the person's face at the time of writing. Naturally, as the audience, we consider what we would do with such power, and what consequences would come with it. Would you use it to improve your life by eliminating your enemies? Would you leave it untouched, reluctant to pass lethal judgment on others? Or would you have ambitions to make a better world by eliminating those you believe we'd be better off without? They all get explored in some respect throughout the series, but for the most part, we see the latter play out through Light Yagami, an exceptional high school student with a notable disgust towards the state of the world.
Day in and day out, the same news on permanent repeat.
After stumbling onto the notebook, he quickly takes it upon himself to rid the earth of evil, exclusively writing names of violent criminals. There's debate about whether the notebook poisoned his soul and corrupted him, but upon rewatch, Light's disdain towards humanity and his willingness to exercise sweeping judgment was apparent right away. I even falsely remembered his moral descent happening more gradually, but nah. In the pilot, Ryuk mentions how differently Light used the notebook compared to previous humans.
Look at how many people you've killed in only 5 days. Most are reluctant to write this much.
Eventually, people catch on that these criminals are being murdered somehow, and the unknown identity of this apparent killer becomes a media sensation.
I think they've taken the name Kira from the English word killer. Can't say I'm too happy about that.
Light believes he's the embodiment of a new world order, aspiring to upend existing society and create a new one. From the first episode, it's clear Light has a serious god complex.
I will become the god of this new world.
But while the notebook probably didn't have any mystical effects on Light's attitude, it definitely changed his behavior in a way that could be attributed to the power the Death Note afforded him. He originally kills under the guise of ridding the world of criminals, but it becomes clear he's more than willing to cross his own moral boundary. For instance, when an FBI agent is tailing him, he goes to extreme lengths to discover his identity and kill him, and later also his wife, rationalizing that anyone who gets in the way of Kira is aiding evil, and therefore must also be punished. It's the same reasoning he uses when he first tries to kill L, the eccentric detective assigned to catch Kira.
We thought that Kira would only go after criminals, but he didn't hesitate to kill my stand-in.
Later, when he voluntarily loses memory of owning the notebook and the murders he committed with it, Light joins L's investigation to hunt down Kira. During this, he recognizes an eerie resemblance between his own beliefs and Kira's, but refuses to believe he would ever cross the line of taking lives. The obvious discrepancy between his values with and without the notebook calls back to the old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. It's reminiscent of the Stanford Prison Experiment, where volunteers were randomly separated as guards and prisoners in the prison simulation. In the psychological experiment, the guards became increasingly cruel towards the inmates until the entire endeavor had to be shut down after a week. The results of the study were long believed to reflect the inherent brutal nature of humans, our intense capacity for cruelty to others when provided even the pretense of authority and power. But more on that in a second. In that sense, it's easy to interpret Death Note in the same vein. Light thought of himself as having a certain moral code he could never break. But clearly, the moment he possessed such power, he was perfectly willing and eager to kill hundreds of people on a whim. No matter what his ideations were for a perfect world, they were quickly put aside for his aspirations to be its ruler. And in classic authoritarian fashion, his journey became more about holding on to power than doing anything good with it. But I don't necessarily think Death Note ascribes to this idea of humanity's intrinsic depravity. In several instances, other characters gain possession of the notebook in some capacity, but they don't ever come close to Light's willingness to kill, no matter how logical or justifiable it may be to use it.
In the end, I couldn't do it. I couldn't bring myself to kill him.
It's easy, especially if you're a teenage edgelord like I used to be way back when, to absorb the belief that our worst qualities are indicative of our base nature, that we all have some sinister inclinations just waiting for an opportunity to bubble to the surface. The aforementioned Stanford Prison Experiment has since been thoroughly debunked, and its findings labeled fraudulent with no scientific merit. But the cynical takeaway persisted because we crave an explanation to why there's so much evil in the world. Light's use of the notebook isn't reflective of the flawed nature of humanity. It's only suggestive of Light's lack of humanity and willingness to enact his own brand of justice on the world.
I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
He simply carried out his power trip in a way he thought would be more morally acceptable. Light's form of judgment is what many, if not most people around the world would associate with justice. That is, retribution. Not that most of us would necessarily carry it out, but the two concepts are often regarded as interchangeable. This is why Kira develops a cult following of supporters. He executes the criminals they believe society has failed to properly punish.
I wanted that man to pay for what he did, but the trial dragged on forever.
The often slow-moving nature of state-sanctioned justice, which sometimes upholds laws perceived as unjust themselves, may feel unsatisfactory to people who endorse capital punishment. But even though he gains a legion of supporters to inflate his growing god complex, clearly there's still people who oppose this authoritarian form of justice and continue to hunt him down. By the end of the series, after years of investigating and weaving through elaborate twists and turns, Light's finally trapped with no one to save him. It felt somewhere between satisfying and pitiful to watch this narcissist with no more tricks up his sleeve groveling in pain and desperation. Significantly, there's a small but distinct difference in how the anime concludes the series versus how the manga does, as the anime seems to portray him with an air of sympathy, flashing visions of his former, more innocent self. Ryuk writes Light's name in his notebook as he dies peacefully on a stairway, representing the nothingness that awaited him in the afterlife and his failed aspirations of ascending into godhood. In the manga, Light dies after begging Ryuk to kill the remaining members of the task force, but the Shinigami ultimately writes Light's name instead, taunting him in the process. In both cases, Light desperately tries to escape his doomed fate, but the manga more closely shows his desperation, clawing to hang on to the little bit of power and life he has left. Even in his aspiration to become a god, he couldn't escape his human desire to live another day and avoid death. Death Note clearly showed the flaws of Light's ideology and the contradictions of his beliefs, and when he finally lost, we're left to assume he was wrong. But did it necessarily mean L and the existing system of justice was right? The narrative in Death Note is largely defined by the intense psychological battle between Light and L. L is the world's greatest detective, originating from an orphanage that specializes in churning out an alphabet soup of crime-solving kid geniuses. It's kind of a long story. Still, unlike the growing part of the world that agrees with Kira's killings, L doesn't see him as anything more than a murderer.
He's driven by a very idealistic notion of justice. We're dealing with an individual who has a very childish concept of right and wrong.
While Light represents an upheaval of the current system of justice, L and the Japanese task force assigned to investigate and capture Kira represent the established law and order. Early on, we get the impression that they'll be diametrically opposed figures, representing two conflicting versions of justice: Light's vigilante/authoritarian justice, and L's established code of law.
I will hunt you down wherever you're hiding and I will eliminate you. I am justice.
L pursues Kira in the name of this conventional mode of justice, but he doesn't really even believe in law and order as much as Light believes in his vision of retributive justice. The only thing that separates them is the side they've chosen, because L's methods aren't exactly by the book.
I can't do anything that would deprive you of basic human rights.
5 hours later.
Hello, mister? Where are you right now?
In pursuit of Kira, L was willing to sacrifice the lives of others and torture suspects he had no legal right to detain. But regardless of if he was right or wrong, it begs the question why he so vehemently wants to stop Kira if he's also willing to commit unethical and inhumane acts in the pursuit of justice. Isn't he betraying the very justice he seeks to uphold? Of course, we rationalize his actions because he's trying to stop the greater evil that is Kira, but it's the same reasoning Light has when he kills innocent people who get in the way of his greater good. So if they're both willing to dismiss their ethics in the name of a greater purpose, what is it that really separates Light and L?
I'll be honest with you. You remind me of Elle. There's something about you that's just like him.
While they both take it upon themselves to represent different iterations of justice and morality, neither of them actually care all that much about it. Light used it to justify his methodical ascent to power, while L used it to rationalize his interest in solving cases.
I'm also childish and I hate to lose.
The values they held and the meaning behind their loss or victory became second to simply knowing who was the better player in this high-stakes game of chess.
Damn it! He got me! Damn, L! I've never been so humiliated in my life!
I think the somewhat strange stairway scene further emphasizes this. In an unexpected, almost tender moment, L cleans and massages Light's feet. They develop something of a friendship while working on the Kira case together. But based on L's cryptic dialogue, we know this is his way of admitting he's finally been bested, and also serves as a final farewell.
You and I will be parting ways soon.
It's a narrative parallel to Jesus washing his disciples' feet, knowing Judas would betray him. The scene wasn't in the manga, and if you're not familiar with the biblical reference, it does mid-key give off sexual tension. Actually, I guess it does that regardless. Shoutouts to all the fanfics out there. Either way, it helps solidify that the main aim of the series was exploring their rivalry. The themes of justice provide an interesting layer of intrigue, but I don't think the show makes a point about which is right or if there's a greater meaning to their presentation.
It won't be too long now before I am able to sentence you to death.
Even the creator of the manga, Sugumi Oba, said, "I didn't put much deep thought into subjects like life and death, or justice and evil. I wrote the story hoping that it would be good entertainment." So at the end of an elaborate arc where Light finally gains the final upper hand,
I've won. Exactly as planned.
there's no greater commentary about which iteration of justice is superior. Both of them were willing to bend their morals in the name of besting the other, making any pretext of an ideological battle null and void. The fact that Light defeated L didn't mean that a new world order is the logical conclusion for an unjust society. It just meant that Light won and L lost, for now. With that, I think we have to reframe the implications, or lack thereof, of Death Note's narrative. It was a strange balancing act of melodrama, existential themes, a crime thriller, and occasionally out of nowhere comedic moments, like the guy in the last few episodes that wouldn't stop saying delete while wielding the notebook.
Delete, 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 delete.
For many fans of the show, including myself, L's death marked the noticeable downfall of the series' quality. From here, we're introduced to Nier and Mello, L's successors, who feel as if L was split into two characters, even sharing the same origin and similar code names and quirks. Personally, I felt if the series was adamant in killing off L, it was a redundant choice to simply replace him with characters that seem like off-brand copies of him.
Why do I feel like I'm talking to L?
We spent the majority of Death Note engulfed in the back and forth between Light and L, so to have Kira defeated by characters introduced 2/3 of the way through was anticlimactic to say the least. And honestly, the last third of the series suffered from recycled plot points that stalled the pacing of what was an originally exciting show.
This means we're dealing with yet another Kira.
Oh man, not again!
Regardless, with Nier and Mello, even in death, L and Light's rivalry persisted through the rest of the series until L's successors ultimately defeated him. While L wasn't alive to see it through, it was his work that led to Kira's defeat. Still, it's a bit of an unsatisfying conclusion for a show with characters so dedicated to trying to forecast each other's moves. Light defeating L didn't prove that Kira was just, and his eventual defeat at the hands of Nier didn't mean the existing world's version of justice was any better.
Well, Nier, looks like I win.
It's hard to take away any lessons when the question of Kira's morality came second to simply solving the mystery and catching him, protecting the status quo at all costs.
It's over. You've lost the game.
For Light, L, Mello, and Nier, it was always about winning by any means necessary. So when Light desperately runs away, Nier doesn't even bother to have him pursued because he already won. He solved the case. Not to mention that Light had already been shot a bunch of times. So was the point of Death Note that humanity is inherently flawed or evil, or maybe that none of it matters at all? In researching Death Note, I was surprised to find out Tsugumi Ohba is sort of a mysterious figure. Details about his personal life, what he looks like, what his real name is, are unknown aside from a few anecdotes. But in the few interviews he's had regarding Death Note, he said, "If I had to choose a theme to express throughout the series, I'd say humans will all eventually die and never come back to life, so let's give it our all while we're alive." It's a weirdly inspirational sentiment that doesn't seem to apply to anything that happened in the series. If we were to apply this theme, Light did give it his all to change the world for what he thought was the better. He even gained a cult following of people who fully believed in his vision for a new world. But ultimately, Light was captured, died pitifully, and the world reverted back to what it was before he became Kira, essentially showing that his efforts were all in vain. He made no lasting change to society.
You're just a murderer, Light Yagami. In the end, you're nothing more than a crazy serial killer.
It hardly aligns with the flowery theme Ohba ascribed to the series, so it's difficult to take his word on what the main theme was. Maybe he just felt pressured to say something meaningful. In contrast, I think the conclusion of the series is actually more indicative of a pessimistic worldview. Yes, Light was eventually stopped, but only after years of murdering people and anonymously ruling the world through fear, leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands, including his own father. And in the end, although Light is initially told about the consequences of using the notebook,
any human who's used a Death Note can neither go to heaven nor hell for eternity.
We learned that regardless of the Death Note or if we were good or evil, there's no heaven or hell to reward or punish any of us. The series leaves us with more questions than answers, but I think Ryuk offers a unique perspective on how to digest the randomness of existence. In a way, Ryuk can be interpreted as an avatar for the audience. Just like us, he watches everything play out purely for entertainment. He has no genuine care for the well-being of the humans involved. And when it's over, he moves on, just as we do when we turn off the TV and move on to the next thing.
We eased each other's boredom for quite a while. Well, Light, it's been interesting.
It further adds to the idea that there's no greater purpose to the world of Death Note, no cosmic rules that govern what happens.
Don't you see this is all just an accident? You actually thought you were chosen because you're so smart or something?
Ryuk talks about the Shinigami world in a way that echoes Light's sentiment about the human world.
The Shinigami realm is slowly rotting. We lead meaningless and empty lives.
For clarity, there's an important distinction between the typical Western idea of death gods and what's depicted in Death Note. What comes to mind for most of us is some haunting personification of death itself, like the Grim Reaper, lurking around the corner to take another soul. But that's not the case with Shinigami.
You're here to take my soul, right?
Huh? What do you mean? Is that some fantasy you humans came up with?
Originating in Japanese folklore around the 18th to 19th century, they're simply agents who help facilitate the cycle of life, since death is just a natural phase of that cycle. It's an attitude emphasized more clearly through how the Shinigami realm is depicted in Death Note. While we can blame the rotting state of the Shinigami world on their laziness, I think it reflects how even these otherworldly gods feel powerless in changing the conditions around them.
We no longer even know why we exist. I doubt there's any reason for our existence at all.
No matter how much power is afforded to them, they're at the mercy of a meaningless world, just as much as we are. So they resign themselves to wasting away, doing nothing with their lives because there's no point in doing anything. It's a depressing existence, and a key difference between Shinigami and humans. Most Shinigami surrender to the hopelessness of nihilism. They have no fight, no real desires, no hope, no anything. Nothing they can point to that makes life feel worthwhile. They merely exist, and at best, watch others exist. And in that sense, Ryuk shouldn't be an avatar for the audience, because he's just a passive observer watching life happen. He finds entertainment in watching humans navigate their own pointless existence. The constant petty squabbles, wars, and betrayals fascinate him, because it all requires so much effort. The humans in Death Note all scratch and claw to either maintain the world they've built or tear it down to start anew, despite the reality of its chaotic and unpredictable nature. It's a cycle that's gone on since the dawn of civilization. Unlike Shinigami, they value being alive. And for me, that's the best takeaway we can get from Death Note. In an uncontrollable, chaotic, and unfair world that's neither completely good nor completely evil, all we can do is keep striving to make it a better one. And not committing atrocities in the process would be nice too. The effort has always been there. It's what makes us human. So I guess that's what Ohba meant after all. The world may be rotting, cruel and uncaring, and people may be led astray, but at the very least, we persist. We continue trying to change the world and our circumstances, no matter how futile or meaningless it may be.
Humans are so interesting.
Thanks for watching the video. There were so many wild ideas being thrown around on Death Note. I really had a hard time finding out what I wanted to talk about, but I think I ended up in a really interesting place. One of the things I didn't really talk about that much was Misa, because she was such a flat character. All she wanted to do was help Light no matter what. It was really over the top, and I don't think it really went with my essay. But tell me what you think of her. Do you think she says anything about the human condition? And that's probably the thing that stood out to me most when I first watched it. When I watched it 10-15 years ago, I was really drawn to the detective aspect of it. So Elle and Light and their rivalry, I was like screaming at the top of my lungs, just hoping Elle would get Light, but you know, it didn't exactly go down like that. Kind of surprised it had this cruel, cold world thing going on, but I think there was an interesting, I don't know, almost hopeful aspect to it. Maybe it's just me. Either way, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Check out our Patreon if you really want to support us, but I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace, and happy Halloween.